my fellow comic book collectors. It's Alan, the Comic Collector Geek, and this is something that's been on my mind, and it's something that I kind of want to ask the community about. And it's one that it's something that I've been thinking more and more and more and more about as we are coming out of this kind of COVID drop, the COVID like blip, like I don't know, catastrophe. I don't know what it is, like where the market just crashed. Um, and it's not just with modern books, it's with actually even right back to the Golden Age. Even the Golden Age books lately have been a bit soft. I was watching the signature auction that was going on this week on Heritage, and I'll be talking about more of this on Sunday. So you check out tomorrow's video, and I'll actually show the whole signature auction in terms of the top books. But I was watching that signature auction, and I sort of priced out a bunch of the books beforehand, just to sort of based on what I think that they should go for, and what they had gone for in the past. But what I noticed was most of them either fell like where I expected them to sell for, or they were under what I expected them to sell for. Now there were a few that went over, but that's, you know, there's always going to be the exception. But the most part, they kind of went below what my expectations were, and they were big books. I mean, this is a signature auction. Like you got Batman 1, Superman 1, like Action number 2, all these really big books, and they were selling for almost like bargain prices. Some of them, just a bargain when you're talking like hundreds of $1,000s worth of books. Like, it's like perspective. But and one of the things that I was thinking about, and it sounds so, I'm like saying, oh, this auction didn't quite go as well as I would have expected. I think there is that kind of soft market, and I've been saying that we've been in a buyer's market for quite some time now. Anyways, like that's everyone knows that, but it might be even worse, and that's where I'm getting to. And I really, this idea has been sort of plaguing my mind, and I want to put it out there. And I find it hard to say because I'm such an optimist. I really want the comic book market to be strong and comics to go up. So I'm struggling to say this, but I think things are actually much worse than what we might think. And why do I say that? Well, if the prices were maintained, let's say, we ignore the COVID blip, just ignore that COVID bump, it's gone, just pretend it didn't happen, okay? And a book, let's say before the COVID bump, was worth like $1,000, just a random number I'm picking. Well, you would expect that book, just to naturally go up to around maybe 1,100 now, because it's been a few years. It should have gone up a little bit over time, maybe 1,200 on a good, depending on the book, right? So, however, that's based on inflation being 2 to 4%, which was for a long time. That's how much inflation was for like over a decade. The inflation rate was around 2 to 4%. So you'd expect, if even if the book just maintained its value, it would be $1,100 rather than $1,000. If you see what I'm saying, because that's just maintaining based on inflation. So the book's not gone up, it's actually just maintained at that price. But what we're seeing is not only did it just sell for about basically the same as what it would have sold before COVID, and sometimes even less, which is even more scary. But what we're seeing is like the inflation rate is not 2 to 4%. It's more like 7 to 10% annually. And when the inflation rate's that high, well, even if it looks like, it's gone up, like let's say it sold for $1,200, well, if it's at 10% for the last 2-3 years, that's actually a discount. And that's the worrying part. So inflation really is a major factor here. And I don't think people have taken that into effect. Like, if you go to Go Collect, they actually show what the inflated, like the value of the dollar is based on the books. And often when I'm looking at these charts, the books are going down even when they look like they're going up. And that's very scary. That's really scary. So I'm not saying that comics are a bad investment. I'm just saying that the market is so weak that, and the inflation is so high that people are, first of all, they're selling books that they normally wouldn't sell. They're selling them for a fraction of what they're worth. And what's happening is we're getting kind of the situation where people are just trying to get some money. They're raising money, and they're selling books that can command big money, and they're selling it at a loss. Well, not a full loss. It looks like they've made money on it, and that can make them feel good. But if you look at the inflation rate, well, they actually lost money on them. And that's really what I'm getting at here, that the inflation rate is hiding an even bigger drop in the market that we didn't, as comic book collectors, we don't really look at. It's always funny when we look at the old price guides, and we look at, in 1970, I could have bought an Action 1 for $1,000, like something like that, right? And now that it's 50 years later, and that Action 1 is $1 million, right? Or whatever, it's like multi-million. But the point is, we also have to calculate inflation. So if I invested that $1,000 back in 1970, how much would that $1,000 be worth today? And it's not just inflation, it's in the investment part of it. So you generally, when you do an investment, you not only make the inflation, because that would be like a really bad investment, just making your inflation money back. You generally want to make a profit every year. And so, like, typically the rule of thumb is that you want to make about double the rate of inflation. And there are times when that wasn't necessarily possible, like in the 80s, the inflation was so high that would be hard to make that. But generally, that's what you want to make, about double the inflation. So the money that you've invested is growing at a rate that's just that much higher than inflation. And if you kind of do the rule of 72, and we let's say the average inflation rate from 1970 or 70, like say early 70s, let's say 50 years, was, let's say average is 5%. You would, like, over all those years, maybe it's higher than that, I'm just giving you a round number, you would expect that so you divide 5 into 72. This is the method, and then you get like 14.8 is the number, I believe. I think that's the right math, or is that wrong? Wait, yeah, 14.8, right? Or 14. Sorry, my math's just terrible today. 14.4. Sorry, 14.4, and yeah, that was really bad in my math skills. Okay, so 14.4 years. Every 14.4 years, the money doubles. Okay, so the money doubles every 14.4 years. You get your money doubling. Okay, so if you think about that over a 50-year period, well, your money's doubled three times, almost 4 times. So $1,000 would double 3 times. Well, that's 2,000, 4,000, 8,000. So something that was worth $1,000 back 50 years ago would be probably worth 8,000 to 10,000 now. Okay, so that's kind of the way to do the calculations. That's at inflation rates. Now you would expect that actually the doubling, because as I said, the rule of thumb is to make not just the inflation rate, so that $1,000 thing is worth now 10,000, right? Well, what would be your compound interest or value that you gained if you're making double the inflation rate? Well, let's say it's 10%, 10% average rate of return. That means that it's doubling every 7 years. which means that it would double 7 times. Okay, so let's do the doubling. So it's 1,000. That's okay. That's where it starts. Well, then it becomes 2,000, 4,000, 8,000, 16,000. Then it becomes 32,000, 64,000, 128,000. So if you have $1,000 $1,000 investment, you should have made $128,000 by 50 years. So see how that works. Now, when you look at the value of that comic, if it's not worth, like if you spent that much money back in 1970 or whatever it was, like 50 years ago, 74, I guess, then you should have made 128,000. Okay? See how that works? So if you have a comic that is over whatever period not giving you that rate of return, then it is a loss. It's either like, you could have just put the money in the bank and done better. And that's something that I really think comic collectors have to start taking into consideration. I hate to be the bearer of bad news because I'm very pro the market. I actually do believe that, there's books that you can make big money on, like Action One. Action One, if you did spend that $1,000 and bought an Action One back in the 70s, well, you've done well because you actually made more than that, and more than that 120 some odd thousand. You actually made several million. Okay, so you did well. But is it the case that all books have done that well? No, it is not. If you bought them for cover price, 10 cents, you probably did well. But that's really the story here, that what we're seeing is not only are we not making any money, but we're actually losing money just based on the inflation numbers. And that's very worrisome. But in a way, as a buyer, I'm a collector, I buy comics. This is a good time to be a buyer because you're getting books at a steal, really a steal. Back to that auction, that signature auction. When I was watching it, I saw a Batman 1. And it was a 6.5 restored. And it sold for $45,000. $45,000. That is insanely low. Generally, you would expect a 6.0, 6.5 to sell for around 70,000. Now, there was a 7.0 that actually did sell for 70,000. But that's a 7.0. It's a higher grade. You would expect it to sell that high or higher. These are really low prices and lower than what previous sales had been. And it's just, there was a Wonder Woman 1, and I love that book. It sold for, in 2019, for about 48,000, and it sold for 40, I think it was 41 with the buyer's premium. So just, it went down 20%. That's insane. That's insane for these big books. So what's happening? I don't know. These are not only big drops in terms of value, but also if you look at that inflation numbers, pretty hard. Some of these books are selling at a loss, not just but a big loss. I mean, this is like where your money's worth less and you're not even getting the same as what it would sell for 5 years ago. So just something to consider. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you're a buyer, this is the time. This is the time to pick up some pretty great books. If the economy gets any worse, obviously the deals will continue to flow, but these are on big books. These are books that are called, not only blue chips, like platinum chips. These are the staples of the comic collecting hobby, and to see them sell for these bargain prices is kind of disturbing. And I wanted to add in this extra factor of looking at inflation. I hope you get my analogies and my explanation of it all. What do you think? What do you think of the value of comics? Where do you think the market is going? Are we in they always talk about the economy, recessions. Are we in a comic recession? That's really the question that I'm trying to get to at the end of all this. Are we in a comic recession? And if not in recession, are we in a depression, which would be really bad? So just some food for thought. I'd love to hear people's opinion. Again, I love comics. I think they're great. They're a good investment in the long term. There are these points in history, though, when it is a better time to be a buyer than a seller. And that's what we're in right now. So that's all I'm trying to get to. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.